Welcome to Mile High Reefers. I'm Scott Anderson, and today we're going to try to answer the question, is freshwater really that much easier than saltwater? When I first started in the hobby, I started with freshwater. And I started with freshwater because at the time, I thought saltwater was really hard. And you had to be an expert aquarist if you were going to keep saltwater. Well, let's talk about really some of the differences and why one might be easier or harder than the other. So, in the most basic forms, all you need for either a freshwater or saltwater aquarium is a tank full of water. Now, the big difference between freshwater and saltwater is, well, you're gonna have to mix your salt for the saltwater. With the water in the tank, you're gonna need some sort of biological filtration to complete that nitrogen cycle. So this could be rock or some sort of filter media, but basically you wanna convert ammonia from ammonia to nitrite to nitrate. Ammonia is toxic and you gotta convert it. And then you need some sort of pump to agitate the water to provide some sort of oxygenation to the water, and a heater. At least for most fish in most parts of the world, we need a heater. Now, this is a very basic system that I just described, and honestly, I don't recommend this to anybody for anything other than a quarantine tank. And if you're gonna use this setup as a quarantine tank, you're gonna have to keep your eye on it because it's really easy for this system to get out of whack. So now we're gonna have to add some equipment. Now, let's go to protein skimmers, because protein skimmers are kind of the magic bullet, in my opinion, for saltwater. And I think they actually, in some ways, make saltwater easier than freshwater. Basically, we're going to create a foam inside a tower that pulls proteins and gunk and all kinds of crap out of the water. Now, you can't do this in freshwater. Freshwater just from its makeup won't create the foam in the same way saltwater does. So in fact, once you throw a protein skimmer on, you get better filtration than a lot of the freshwater filtrations out there. And it's a type of filtration that just doesn't work on freshwater. Okay, so that may be true, but plumbing a saltwater system with overflows and all of that is way harder than a hang-on back freshwater system. That's true. But the fact is you can keep saltwater using hang-on back filtration. In fact, we did that for many years. In fact, a lot of the same technology on a freshwater system will also work on a saltwater system. And what's really cool is when I see people using the reef-ready tanks to put sumps into their freshwater systems. And I think that that's the way to go for freshwater as well. Really, the technology is very similar. You can run sumps, you can run a lot of very similar equipment. Really, one's not harder than the other. If we compare a fish-only freshwater system to a fish-only saltwater system, really, I don't think there's a lot of difference in how hard they are to keep. In my opinion, the problems start getting a little harder when you start adding fish to your system because, well, fish can be hard. And this is both freshwater and saltwater. The reality is whether you're keeping freshwater or saltwater, you need to know the fish that you're gonna buy, its behavior, how they're gonna interact with the other fish in your system, and that's where it gets hard. But really, it's gonna be the same between freshwater and saltwater. I remember the old days when I was in freshwater, I killed a lot of fish because I didn't know the conditions that they needed and I didn't provide the right conditions, and some freshwater fish are just difficult to keep. In some ways, freshwater can be harder than saltwater because you have to dial your water conditions to the fish. A lot of fish like different water conditions. Some like hard water, some like soft water, some like low pH, some like high pH. It really can be difficult to mix and match your fish, and a lot of times you end up creating a regional type tank when you get into some of these more advanced species. So this is something we really don't have to worry about on the saltwater side. The ocean chemistry is very similar all over the world, so basically a fish from the Caribbean can be mixed with a fish from the Pacific, and as long as they don't fight, the water chemistry is going to be fine. That's not always true with freshwater. Now, a lot of freshwater fish can be adapted to different water conditions, and a lot of tank-raised stuff are raised to handle different water conditions, but the reality is from a water quality standpoint, freshwater really can be harder than saltwater. I think if you were to look at the mortality rate of freshwater fish compared to saltwater fish in the first 6 months that they're in a tank, you would find that freshwater fish have a higher mortality rate. Now, part of this is probably because newer, less experienced people get into the hobby, and I think part of it is because we try to put freshwater fish in systems that aren't as nicely designed. And that really brings me to what I think is the big holdback for a lot of people on saltwater, and that's cost. So without a doubt, saltwater costs more than freshwater. Now, cost, depending on your budget, it doesn't make something harder, but it does influence your decision-making process. It's really not uncommon for somebody on the reef aquarium side of the hobby to spend more money on a single piece of equipment than a lot of new freshwater hobbyists will spend on their entire tank, livestock included. $600-700 for a light isn't uncommon, and a lot of people, that's too much for their budget for their entire freshwater system. So if we did this by a dollar for dollar comparison, I would say that reef aquariums or saltwater aquariums are harder if we were to give the same budget. If you gave me $500 to put together a freshwater tank and $500 to put together a saltwater tank, I think I'd have a lot better luck putting together a really cool freshwater tank for $500 than I would a saltwater tank. But of course, both freshwater and saltwater are full of high-end fish and equipment, and you can spend as much money as you want, and you can make either hobby as hard as you want. A planted discus tank could easily cost as much as a reef tank of an equal size. For a planted tank, you need the big lights, just like a reef tank. You're going to need to fill that with plants. You're going to have to fill that with substrate. You're going to have to worry about fertilization. In fact, in my opinion, a planted tank is probably as hard to keep as a reef tank. So other than salinity, really, I would say a freshwater and a saltwater tank are equally difficult. Really, it all comes down to what you want to keep. If you want to do a full-blown reef tank, you can do that, and you can do that on the easy side. You can also do a full-blown reef tank with the most difficult possible fish in coral and make life really hard on yourself. Freshwater, it's the same way. You can pick easy, peaceful, forgiving fish, or you can go super high-end fish with super high-end plants, and you're gonna have the same kind of problems. Now, your source water is gonna be another issue for both reef tanks and saltwater. But I would say on the saltwater side, we might have it a little easier than you freshwater guys. You freshwater guys, you get this water coming in. If your water coming in is junk, you've got a lot of problems you've got to deal with. On the reef tank side, we can just run RODI and then mix our water up. And in fact, most people run RODI and we have perfectly clean water to start with. Now, you can't do that on the freshwater side because the fish, they need the minerals, they need the stuff that's in the water. We provide that on the saltwater side through our salt mix. So on the reef tank side, in some ways we have it easier because we create a consistent water source every time we mix our water. And it makes a huge difference. Now, you freshwater guys, if you live in an area with really good, clean water that matches what your fish want, you've got it really easy. But anybody who's tried to keep a freshwater fish that's from a different environment than the source water you're putting it in will know how difficult it can be to get that water quality where you want it and maintain it. Because just like in a saltwater reef system, it can be a big deal to keep consistent water quality for those difficult to keep freshwater fish. I really don't think freshwater is any easier than saltwater. On the saltwater side, we have really easy fish and we have fish that are almost impossible to keep in captivity. Turns out freshwater side is exactly the same way. You've got super easy fish to keep that are hard to kill, and you've got fish that are almost impossible to keep in captivity. On the reef side of things, we've got corals that are incredibly easy to keep, and yet we've also got corals that are almost impossible to keep in captivity. Planted side of the freshwater hobby, same deal. You've got plants that grow incredibly fast and don't really care about their conditions, and you've also got plants that are incredibly difficult to keep. So really, one hobby isn't any easier than the other, or one side of the hobby isn't any easier than the other. It comes down to how much research you want to put into it, how much time you want to put into it, how much effort you want to put into it, and you can really make it as easy or as hard as you like. It comes down to your personal design. Really, one's not harder than the other. It just takes a lot of research, and if you put the research in, you're gonna be successful. That's not saying you're not gonna have failures. They happen. They happen to the best of us. But put the time in, put the research in, and I hate to say it, on any system, you're gonna have to put the money in. Low budget, crappy freshwater system's gonna have problems. Same with a saltwater system. You put the money in, you get good equipment on either a saltwater or a freshwater, and you're gonna have a lot easier time. Spend the money, get good equipment, budget that from the beginning, and you're gonna be successful. So in my opinion, one isn't any easier or harder than the other, but I will give the cost side to freshwater because in general, freshwater is cheaper than saltwater. So I'm sure this video proved to be controversial. So in the comments column, tell me you agree with me, and if you don't, tell me why I'm wrong. So thanks for watching this episode of Mile High Reefers. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.